Mount Everest's 1996 disaster is one of the most talked about, most confusing, well-known, and deadliest disaster ever happened in the mountain's history to date. There are many videos available on this disaster, which are all important in their own right. However, this video will focus on the key points and summarize what exactly happened on that day, regardless of anyone's perspective or the controversies built around it. This video is an effort to highlight only the main events of the disaster for introductory understanding to a new viewer. In 1996, the towering giant Himalaya beckoned climbers from all over the world. Among them were elite alpinists, seasoned guides, and even some relatively inexperienced adventurers, each lured by the mountain's allure and the promise of standing atop the world. But for many, this climb would prove fatal, as the 1996 Everest disaster would become one of the deadliest events in the mountain's history. Rob Hall, a highly respected guide from New Zealand, led one of the most popular commercial expeditions on Everest. His company, Adventure Consultants, was known for its impressive safety record. Among Hall's clients was Doug Hansen, a mailman from Seattle making his second attempt after failing to summit the previous year due to bad weather. Hall's dedication to getting his clients to the summit was matched only by his reputation as a careful and cautious guide. Meanwhile, Scott Fischer, a charismatic American climber, led a rival expedition with his company, Mountain Madness. Known for his daring style and physical prowess, Fischer had a loyal following and was admired for his ability to push boundaries. Though he had summited Everest before, leading others to the top was a new challenge for him. His team included experienced climbers and clients. Among them was Sandy Hill Pittman, a New York socialite who aimed to climb the 7 summits, the highest peaks on each continent. The climbers arrived at Everest Base Camp in April, acclimatizing and waiting for a break in the weather. In the days leading up to their planned summit attempt, guides, Sherpas, and clients, they undertook grueling rotations up and down the mountain's camps, each step bringing them closer to the peak and deeper into the Everest's death zone. May 10th was chosen as the day for the final push. The forecast had promised a window of clear weather, and the climbers rose at midnight at Camp 4 to begin their summit bid. Temperatures at Camp 4 and the summit were well below freezing, the oxygen thin, and the wind cut like knives through their heavily insulated gear. Despite their preparations, delays plagued the ascent. The climbers waited in line to navigate key passages, particularly the Hillary Step, a notorious section of rock that required careful maneuvering. Every minute spent in the death zone, at the altitudes above 26,000 feet, drained precious energy and compromised physical and mental faculties. Hall and Fischer, aware of the risks, had set a turnaround time of 2 p.m. Anyone not near the summit by then would need to abandon the climb and descend. Yet, the summit fever that gripped the climbers was fierce, a near-hypnotic determination to reach the top, no matter the cost. Doug Hansen, who had been driven to succeed after his earlier failure, continued upward past the turnaround time with Hall by his side. Yasuko Namba, a Japanese climber with Hall's group, also pressed on, inspired by her goal of becoming the oldest Japanese woman to summit Everest. Now, the turnaround time, whether it was 2 p.m. or 1 p.m., is debatable. By late afternoon on May 10th, many climbers had reached the summit, exhausted but exhilarated. The views were breathtaking. the satisfaction of achieving the impossible almost surreal. But the descent was where the true endurance would be tested, and it would prove many would not survive. A brutal storm rolled in unexpectedly, shrouding the mountain in darkness and intense winds. Snow fell in blinding waves and the temperature plunged. Climbers quickly lost sight of each other in the blizzard, their headlamps barely piercing the swirling snow. Lost and disoriented, some wandered off the route, unknowingly heading toward the precipice of Everest's steep slopes. Rob Hall, who had stayed behind to assist Doug Hansen, tried desperately to help him descend. But Hansen, weakened and suffering from hypoxia, could barely move. Hall made repeated calls to base camp, but the help was impossible in the ferocious conditions. Exhausted and running low on oxygen, Hall and Hansen were trapped high on the mountain as the night fell, with little hope of rescue. Further down the mountain, Scott Fischer also struggled, already suffering from the early effects of altitude sickness before the summit push. The exertion of climbing combined with the lack of oxygen had taken its toll. Fischer's Sherpa, Lopsang Jangbu, attempted to help him, but the weight of Fischer's failing body and the storm's intensity made progress extremely slow. Throughout the night, the situation grew more desperate. Climbers bivouacked wherever they could find a semblance of shelter, huddling in groups to conserve warmth. Bivouacking is a technique mountaineers use to spend the time on the mountain when waiting for more favorable conditions. Some were buried under snowdrifts, others were frostbitten and immobilized. Beck Weathers, a Texan doctor with limited vision due to a previous eye surgery, was among those lost in the blizzard. Disoriented and too weak to move, he slumped into the snow, succumbing to the cold and hypoxia. A handful of climbers managed to find their way back to Camp 4. But for Rob Hall and Doug Hansen, the situation was dire. On the morning of May 11th, Hall managed to radio base camp, describing his and Hansen's condition in grim detail. Weakened and stranded without supplemental oxygen, he had little hope for survival. In a heartbreaking final call, he spoke to his pregnant wife in New Zealand, expressing his love and saying goodbye as he drifted in and out of consciousness, succumbing soon after. Scott Fischer, lying just below the summit, also perished from exposure and altitude sickness. His death marked the culmination of terrible tragedy that would later prompt serious reflection on commercial climbing and the ethics of guiding inexperienced climbers in such dangerous environments. One of the most miraculous aspects of the disaster was the survival of Beck Weathers. Left for dead, he somehow regained consciousness, half frozen and blinded, and staggered down toward Camp 4 in what was later described as an act of sheer will. His face was severely frostbitten, and he had suffered extensive damage to his hands and feet. But his survival against such odds remains one of the most extraordinary accounts of human resilience on Everest. As the storm subsided, the full scale of the tragedy became clear. 8 climbers from various expeditions had died in the storm, including some of the most experienced mountaineers in the world. The events were widely covered by the media, raising questions about the commercialization of Everest and the ethics of guiding clients who may not be fully prepared for the risks. The 1996 Everest disaster cast a harsh light on the risks associated with commercial expeditions on the world's highest peak. Both Rob Hall and Scott Fischer accomplished climbers with reputations for prioritizing safety had underestimated the deadly combination of summit fever, inexperience, and the unpredictable mountain weather. In the aftermath, the climbing community began to reassess its approach to guiding on Everest. Rules regarding the number of climbers per expedition and qualifications of clients were scrutinized, and greater emphasis was placed on ethical decision making and risk assessment. The mountain had become a symbol of human ambition, but it also served as a reminder of nature's unforgiving power. The legacy of the climbers lost in 1996 endures, immortalized in John Krakauer's best-selling book Into Thin Air, which recounted his first-hand experience, or quote-unquote first-hand experience, as a journalist on the ill-fated expedition. The story of the 1996 disaster has also been told by Anatoly Bukrev in his book. There are other documentaries and films resonating with those drawn to the mountains and serving as a stark warning of the dangers they conceal. As climbers continue to pursue the challenge of summiting Everest, the memories of Rob Hall, Doug Hansen, Scott Fischer, and others who perished remain etched into the icy slopes of the mountain. The tale of that tragic spring in 1996 stands both as a testament to human endurance and a sobering reminder of the risks inherent in chasing the summit of the world. In the spring of 1996, I was there, just a few hundred kilometers away from Mount Everest in first year of my university. This whole incident unfolded to me in the newspapers at that time, and later in life, it grew on me as I started hiking, climbing, and mountaineering. I have not read any biased book on this incident yet. I have my own perspective on this and 1924 Everest expedition. However, I have watched a few great videos on this incident. Please do subscribe to this channel, as we will continue making videos that matter.